Hey people of the VC, it's Andy Cloudy Milder. A long time ago I promised quite a few people that I would do a ranking of the Magnum discography. Magnum being one of my favourite bands, has been since the mid 80s when I first discovered them. I never owned any of their original works back in the 80s. I just had stuff on dubbed cassettes. When I started collecting vinyl again, quite a few years ago now, I started collecting their physical media, and my collection covers vinyl, tapes, and CDs. Now, I did originally plan, and I put a lot of work into doing a ranking video for Magnum. But Magnum is one of those bands that is incredibly consistent across their discography. They've got 21 albums in total, and I was getting to the point where I kind of had a bottom three, maybe four was easy, a top three, maybe four was easy, but then between 4 and 17 there was so much interchangeable stuff, and I would just be talking about, number 17 is not that much different from number 13, number 11, number 6. It became such a headache that I thought I'm going to reset and do more of a discography walkthrough. Now, this will be a chronological walkthrough of the works of Magnum that I have in my collection, and it also gives me the opportunity to show some live or compilation albums that I have that wouldn't feature in a studio album ranking. So for those of you that were expecting a ranking video, I do apologise. I will, of course, as I go through this, talk about some of my favourites and talk about the ones that are perhaps not so high on my favourites list. But honestly, Magnum is one of those bands. They're like Motorhead, not in terms of sound style at all, opposite end of the spectrum, but one of those bands that are so consistent, and they have a signature sound that as soon as you put on one of their albums, you know it is a Magnum album. And if you are a fan of Magnum, you know you're going to enjoy it. Now, of the 21 studio albums, I own 19, and I wouldn't normally do a discography if I didn't own the full set. But there's a reason why I don't own 2 of them, and I will come to those as we go through this. And because there is 21 albums, I have decided I'm going to split this into 2, so I don't end up with this video could easily be 50 minutes to an hour, and I don't want to do one video that is that long. So Magnum were around for 2 phases, really. Their first phase, and when they ultimately split up in around 1995, and then when they reformed again in around 2001. So this video is going to cover all of their releases from the late 70s up to the 94-95 period, and then I'm going to do a follow-up video which probably filmed straight after this and released pretty soon after. Will cover from 95 on to present day. So I hope you stay with me through this, and Magnum be one of those bands I don't think are that well known. They're unsung heroes of the music world, I feel, but they have stood the test of time. 21 albums is no mean feat at all, and only bands that consistently write good stuff are going to get contracts with record labels to continue releasing those albums. So Magnum started off, originally formed in 1972. The 2 mainstays in Magnum all the way through are Tony Clarkin on guitar, who is the main songwriter for the band, and Bob Catley on vocals. They are ever present throughout every single album that Magnum have done. But although they formed in 72, their first album didn't see the light of day until 1978. Personally, I'm surprised they weren't bigger, but I think their sound is a little bit of an acquired taste. So I'm generally a metal guy. I like metal, I like thrash, I like all that stuff. But Magnum are on the more melodic, proggy, quite keyboardy rock, although not, there's chuggy guitars in there as well. Like, I find them difficult to pigeonholed because I have heard them talked about as being prog rock, but when I listen to sort of classic prog rock, which I'm not particularly a fan of, it doesn't sound like that at all. So they were perhaps too late for the sort of the Tull Brigade in the 70s, and they were a little bit too melodic for the early 80s and the birth of the new wave of British heavy metal. So I think they kind of stayed a little bit underground and never really got that big push of success, but they do have a very solid and loyal fan base, and I'm one of those. And as I say, they're consistent, bloody consistent all the way through. So Tony Clarkin, main songwriter, and they have forged a relationship. Their album covers are some of the best in the business because they have one of the best in the business, Rodney Matthews, to that draws. He must have done about 90% of their covers. There was a period of time when he didn't do their albums, but he has been a mainstay and almost like an extra member of the band, like the Terry Gilliam of Monty Python. Really, his artwork is synonymous with Magnum. And Magnum have always used him. You'll see lots of examples of Rodney Matthews' work throughout these next two videos. Let me start showing some albums. I'm 6 minutes in and I've been accused of having too long an intro, absurd intros before by a commenter who was a bit of a... Anyway, let's not go there. So, although the first album came out in 1978, I'm going to start off actually in 1993. In 1993, Magnum released this album called Archives. And this contains a lot of really early demos. In fact, the first 4 songs you see there are from 1974, 4 years before they actually released an album. And the liner notes for this actually say, the first 4 tracks are the first 4 ever recordings of Magnum, and were recorded at one of Birmingham's foremost studios, Nest, in 1974, a time whilst Magnum initially searched for a musical identity. And those first 4 songs, oh, and by the way, I've got this CD courtesy of Mark G with a C. Those first 4 tracks, had that been the Magnum sound, I wouldn't be sitting here owning 19 of their 21 studio albums and talking about what a great band they are now, because that sound it's very, very folky. There's flutes, woodwind, all sorts of stuff in there that it's bizarre. Now, it's not an album that I will revisit very often, but I was delighted that Mark sent it to me because it was a big surprise to me, and this is the most un-Magnum sounding album that I guess Magnum have had. But as I say, this was released in 1993 on Jet Records, and there's a lot of early demos. There's also some B-sides and other recordings all the way up to 1992. But those first 4 tracks, whoever suggested that Magnum stop doing that style of music and go to the more melodic rock side, I'm eternally grateful for them for enabling my love affair with this band. So that's the starting point, 1993 release with the 1974 demos. But let's dive in and show the debut album. And I do have plenty of notes here, so I am going to be looking away because I can't remember what I had for breakfast, let alone the contents of the 11 or 12 albums I'm going to show you for this first video. So in 1978, Magnum released Kingdom of Madness, and it was signed to Jet Records. And this is a 9 track. Now the sound on here, it has a real Queen vibe to it. I think they're not trying to sound like Queen, but it feels like Queen was a big influence maybe on their change of direction and the style that they went from the folky side. It also has a little bit of a Bowie vibe as well to it. There's still flute on here. It's still kind of progressive rock, but while it has the vibe of others like Queen and Bowie, it is Magnum, and their signature sound was forged on this album. It's very melodic, it's keyboard heavy, and the thing that endears me to Magnum is Bob Catley's vocals. It fits perfectly with the music, and it's very distinct. No one else sounds like Bob Catley, and grateful for that. Lots of great classic songs on here. There's the Jet label. In fact, the first few albums I'm going to show are going to have the same label, but I will no doubt show it anyway. In the Beginning, Kingdom of Madness. That's a classic Magnum song, early song that's still played today. Invasion, Lords of Chaos, Magnum, Kingdoms of Madness. This was actually re-released with a Rodney Matthews cover. They hadn't started their relationship with Rodney Matthews at this point. Moving on to their second album, imaginatively titled Magnum II. This one's quite difficult to find in a really decent condition. I was very, very lucky to get this. It's not mint by any means, but it doesn't have any ring wear on here at all. Now, Magnum II, to me, it failed to live up to the energy of a Magnum 1. I think they put all their best stuff on Magnum Kingdoms of Madness, and then had to write stuff quickly, as bands often do, to get to build on that success and get the second album out there. Having said that, though, there are some good songs on here. Great Adventure, Changes, If I Could Live Forever, and The Battle. Four really, really good songs on here. Maybe one of the reasons why I don't like this so much is, and the next album I'm going to show, which is a live release, was my introduction to a lot of these songs. So where I was used to the live versions, and I've said this before when I've talked about Iron Maiden and Live After Death, and then hearing Peace of Mind after, Peace of Mind seemed a little bit lackluster, even though it's a lot of people's favourite album, because I was used to the energy of the live recordings. So many songs on here I first heard live, and then I've not quite got my head around them as much from a studio perspective, but it's still a good album, and it's still many songs on here that they would probably still play to this day. Magnum being a band I've not actually seen live at all. I would love to, but I don't know if maybe it's a little bit too late. Now, because of the lack of success with Magnum II, the label was keen to put out a live album, and this is Magnum Marauder from 1980, again on Jet Records. It was an attempt to revive the commercial failure of Magnum II. 6 of the 8 songs on here are from Magnum II, and this was recorded at London's Marquee Club on the 15th of December 1979. The best song on here by far is the last one, Lords of Chaos. Absolutely magic. Well worth checking out if you want to hear Magnum live. And you can see some pictures of the band. Let's say none of these early records have any sort of inner sleeves or anything to speak of. In 1982, and this was one of my intros to the band. So I had this album I'm going to show, which is the third album, and the fifth album, which is going to come up, on either side of a C90 cassette back in around 1980, 85, 86. But in 1982, and the first Rodney Matthews cover we will see today is Magnum and Chase the Dragon. If I was to do a ranking, this would be up there. This is one of my go-to Magnum albums. Interesting enough, no inner, but we do have all the lyrics on the back. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 songs on here. Songs of note on here would be The Spirit, Sacred Hour, Soldier of the Line. Side 1 is incredible, probably one of the best sides that Magnum have put out. Side 2, perhaps not so much, but absolutely killer stuff. Let's say, and this is where my foothold into Magnum and where I started to get on board with them. And I say, absolutely killer cover. There's no mistaking a Rodney Matthews cover. Really beautiful artwork. So the fourth studio album, and one which I have only recently been, last 4 or 5 years, become acquainted with, is Magnum the 11th Hour. I found this one when I was record digging in Newcastle, and again, Rodney Matthews cover. Met up with a fellow VCer who doesn't do so many videos these days, Chris Barron, and he showed me his local haunts, and I found this in a pretty new record shop, and it's very, very near mint condition. Again, we're still on Jet, but there's a little bit more money that's being thrown at this one, and we've got an inner sleeve with lyrics. This was the last album that Magnum would be on with Jet Records. Apparently there was tension building between the label and the band, and it resulted in the band having to produce this album themselves, and I don't think they'd really done a lot of production before, and I don't think they've ever particularly been that happy with the release. That face. Fantastic stuff. Songs on here, and the songs aren't listed on the back. That kind of annoys me if I have to get the inner sleeve out. But The Great Disaster, Hit and Run, and Breakdown. Breakdown is really, really powerful song, and one that is well worth checking out. So here we have 1983's The 11th Hour. Moving on to release 5. This was the other side of the C90 tape I was talking about earlier. This is Magnum On The Stories, Teller's Night, and one of my favourite covers. In the 80s, I was really into fantasy fiction, and I absolutely love that cover. Again, we have lyrics on the back, but they are printed in yellow on grey, so there is no reading that. There was no reading that when I was 14. With my eyesight now, not a hope in hell. But this is absolutely superb. We have got killer songs on here. Just Like an Arrow and Two Hearts are probably a couple of my favourite on here. The success of this album, so this was on FM Records, their first release there. They got producer Kim Wolven, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, of Thin Lizzy fame on here, and this is a much more commercial 80s sound. Keyboards are a lot more prevalent throughout, but yeah, this might be my number 1 or 2. The top 2 or 3 could change depending on the weather. But On A Storyteller's Night is a great place to start off with Magnum. And the strength of this album got them a deal with Polydor, so FM was just a little bit of a stopgap. Next up is not a studio album. This is a double compilation called Anthology. That's not a Rodney Matthews cover. So this is kind of, well, it's an official release. It's not a release. And there's a few examples of this. It's not a compilation release from the label that they were on. In fact, this is on Raw Power. And Raw Power did a lot of compilation albums in the 80s where they seemed to buy the rights to bands' first couple, 2 or 3 albums and put out compilations on the basis of that. It is a gatefold. Some great live shots going on there. But this is all the songs I think are here are licensed from the Jet years. So it's a double album. Side 1 is all tracks from Magnum 1, Kingdom of Magnus, Magnum 2, Chase the Dragon, and 11th Hour. So it's pretty much a side per album. Got a couple of live tracks on here as well. It was originally released in 1985, Castle Communications, but this is the 86 vinyl release on Raw Power. label. So while it is I guess an official release, it's not a release that was done probably with the band's knowledge on their current label at the time. So album number 6 is Vigilante. Again, I love this album, but it is very, very keyboard, 80s commercial sounding. It was co-produced by Roger Taylor of Queen, and it certainly has that production feel to it. To me, it's their Turbo. Like, you know, Judas Priest, people never rank Turbo high, and Turbo for Judas Priest is not a typical Judas Priest album. This, while it's not, I mean, it's Magnum. It sounds like Magnum. You know it was Magnum instantly, but it is different enough from their more sort of hard rock side of things to stand out. And but I absolutely love it. Songs on here: Holy Rider, Vigilante, Backstreet Kid, Sometime Love. It's an album that's really worth checking out, but expected to be a lot more commercial and keyboard oriented. So keyboards are much higher in the mix, very synthy, but it's very, very 80s. You can't get away from it. Probably not the best album to introduce people from 2020, but certainly it is one of my favourites. And Midnight You Won't Be Sleeping, it does have saxophone on it. Forget everything I've said about saxophone. This is the exception that proves the rule. It's a great song. We have another kind of non-current label compilation that came out in 1987 on FM Records. So Storyteller's Light was on FM Records, and then FM produced this single disc comp with 10 tracks, and it comprises of FM and Jet release tracks. We have a inner sleeve, it's just a standard FM catalogue, and FM label. We've got 3 from Chase the Dragon, 2 from Storyteller's Night, 2 from Magnum II, 2 from the 11th Hour, and Kingdom of Madness from the debut album of the same name. Good compilation, great way to get into these bands. In 1988, I say that the strength of Storyteller's Night got Magnum a deal with Polydor, and they were there for a few years, and they released Wings of Heaven, which includes their hit single, Days of No Trust. But this is probably my least favourite album from the 80s. It's a little dull, if I'm going to be honest, but then what do I know, because this is the album that they got the most commercial success in the 80s from. It charted, and it was their first album to break the top 10. There's just nothing particularly jumps out at me on here. I probably do need to give it a little bit more of a go. I mean, Don't Wake the Lion Too Old Too Young is 10 plus minutes. Days of No Trust is probably one of the better songs on here, but as I say, it's not a go-to album for me, but is obviously a go-to album for a lot of other people because it gave them some commercial success that they craved. 1989, we have another non-current label release. This time it's a live album called Invasion Live. Now, while the cover does look like it's Rodney Matthews influenced, it's not. It's by some chap called Merlin from 1978. This is a live album with 9 tracks. It was recorded in 1982 from a show in Nashville, Tennessee, where Ozzy Osbourne was headlining and Magnum was supporting. That seems such a strange combination. Magnum being, I mean, they've always kind of looked a mature band, sensible band, nice guys, and supporting Ozzy. It does say on the back that the crowd was really raucous, but I can't imagine they would be raucous because they were there to watch Magnum. And the other interesting thing here is the word live is in quotes. So I wonder how live it actually is. Now this is a 2-disc set. You can see here it contains 7 previously unreleased recordings and an interview disc. So we have the Revolver Records disc here. We've got Soldiers of the Line, Reborn, Sacred Hour, Spirit, Changes, All of My Life, Invasion, Kingdom of Madness. All great songs from the first 3 Magnum albums. And they sound great live. I mean, it does sound really good. But the interview disc sounds terrible. It sounds like it's interviewed. An interview was taken in a pub. There's lots of background noise. I've only listened to it once, and it was a while ago now, and it wasn't worth going back and listening to again. But you know, a nice piece to have, 2-disc set like this. And the interview was just kind of it kind of feels like you're not there for the start and the end. You're just kind of there for the middle of the interview, and they didn't seem that enthusiastic about it at all. But nice record to have. I like live albums, and this is no exception. Great to hear Magnum, even though this was released in 1989, hearing what they were like in 1982 when they were just really starting to find their sound and find their rhythm. So we move into the 1990s, and still on Polydor, Magnum released Goodnight LA, and I believe this was named after the recording studio that it was recorded in. Reckless Man, best track off here. It's a step up from Wings of Heaven. Again, it charted well for them. Have an inner sleeve with the lyrics, and I think it's just the standard Polydor label. Oh no, it's a custom label. There we go. Yeah, a great start to the 90s, and things seem to be going really well for them. Interesting cover, not one of my favourite covers, and certainly by this time Rodney Matthews was not doing their covers anymore. In 1992, now I don't have this on vinyl, so that's in fact my entire Magnum vinyl collection. It's quite so I have vinyl, CD and cassette. I have all the vinyl from 78 up to 90. 1992 gave us Sleepwalking, which is what I have on cassette, and then everything after this I have on CD. So this is the break in the collection. I have this courtesy of Metal Mickey, very kind that he sent me that, because I didn't have a copy of this on any format, because this album is really, really hard to find in any format. There's a nice big J card. We get a better indication of the full artwork here. It's a really good album. I say it's never been reissued. I'd like it to be. I've been looking for at least a CD copy of this for a long time, but it's not silly prices in terms of, you know, hundreds of pounds, but it's a lot more than I would want to buy for a CD. Songs on here: Sleepwalking and The Flood. Probably, yeah, they're probably two of the best songs. This is on Music for Nations. Unfortunately on this tape, and I haven't told you, Mike, so sorry about that, there's on the song Broken Wheel on side A and the equivalent on side B, is a big dropout. Some just the age of the cassette. I mean, you can't really legislate against that, but it's a really good album, and I would like to find at least a CD copy of this, because I don't think a vinyl copy is going to be forthcoming unless they do a reissue. Then I would probably snap that up as well. The Flood, what I'm talking about, is one of the rockier songs on here, but it's a really good album. I would say Magnum hit the 90s running. They certainly weren't going to give up the ghost. The 10th studio album is one of those that I talked about before that I don't actually own. It's called Keeping the Night Light Burning, and it was their unplugged album. They thought it would be a great idea to revisit a lot of their songs and just do an unplugged and release its official album. Now, I'm not a massive fan of unplugged acoustic versions of songs, so it's not an album I have ever particularly wanted to source out. Maybe if I found it cheap one day, I would pick it up just to fill in that gap, but I don't feel the need to have that one at all. And the last album for this part is 1994's Rock Art. This is a really good album. One that I'm only recently familiar with. This is one of the last ones that I had to pick up. It's the 11th studio album. It is less melodic than a couple of the previous albums. It is more of a sort of a hard rock and roll style album. There's some slower bits on here, but there's some songs that really sort of pick up on that. You could almost call them heavier, maybe, but it's certainly not heavy metal at all. Still has that late 80s, early 90s sound to it at all, but as I say, like most Magnum releases, it sounds like Magnum. You're going to get Magnum. You're not going to be disappointed if that's what you are looking for. Songs on here, We All Need to Be Loved, the first track, and The Tall Ships. So following this release in 1994, in 1995, Tony Clarkin was having some, I think he was having some creative issues. He wasn't able to change, I guess. So I would say Magnum would be very consistent. I think maybe he wanted to go a different way. So in 1995, he decided to quit the band. And being the main songwriter for Magnum throughout all of the albums that I've shown so far, the band didn't think they were really in a position just to get another guitarist and carry on. I mean, where would the material come from? So they all decided at that point to disband the band. And that was it for Magnum for a good 6 years or so. Clarkin and Catley went on and did a side project called Hard Rain, I think it was. I've not actually heard any of that material myself. But they did reform again in around 2001, and that's where we will pick up again in part 2 and carry on with the Magnum discography that I own. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join me again in part 2. Cheers.